due consideration of our side of the story. That is the point. That is, in an election like this, where there's so much is at stake, it's only fair to consult the other party and let us agree how do we move forward to actualize the requirements set out under the Supreme Court ruling.
All right, but also I'd like to hear, but apart from the consultations, that there was no spirit of cooperation, like you mentioned. Are you comfortable? What are you uncomfortable with regard to this amendment bill? But before you answer that, as you can see on your screens, we're focusing on what's happening with the NASA anti-IEBC demos. Those are pictures coming to us. Is that Kibra? And on the other side, Kisumu, I beg your pardon, Kisumu. And we also have Nairobi on the other side of the screens. That's just side Anniversary Tower. So that is in Kondele. As you can see, the demos have already begun, and in earnest, quite a number of people have come out really to be part of the demonstrations. And as you can see, still here in Nairobi, things are still calm. We had our Chris Tairu earlier on just giving us an update that today there seems to be more police officers who have been deployed to the city center more than they were last week. And so we wait to see if indeed it's going to be a chaotic turn of events. But as you can see on the other side of the screen, quite peaceful, with the NASA supporters just coming out to be part of the demos that will be taking place across the country, and especially in the strongholds, in the places that are considered as opposition strongholds. So that is what's happening there. We'll be speaking shortly to our Rashid Ronald to give us an update of that. Just after this, where exactly are these supporters heading to? We'll be getting the latest from Rashid Ronald, even as we wait to see what's going to be happening here in the city. Remember that last week the principals were not part of the protests or demonstrations, and they said that their foot soldiers, that is their supporters, came out to really represent and send out their message, which they did. All right, so coming back to our discussion, Dr. I was asking you to do something to do with, apart from, that spirit of incorporation, that should be there, especially within things to do with Parliament and the proceedings. Do you think, what exactly is NASA uncomfortable with these proposed laws?
If you have had an occasion to read the majority rule in the Supreme Court judgment, they have been very clear in their mind that the bungled election was not necessarily lack of adequate laws, was complete failure to follow the laid down procedures under Section 83 of the Election Act, various provisions in the Constitution, and their own regulations. And that's why our council were very clear that IEBC was a law into itself. It would set the law, break them with impunity, without caring what's the outcome. We are saying we might probably have no problem with the amendments that are being proposed. But the amendments, the way they're being presented, is as if they're geared towards protecting a certain objective, achieving a certain objective, not necessarily achieving free and fair elections.
All right, let me take you up on that. One of the things that, these proposed laws, are going for is that you have, 15 years jail term for presiding officers or returning officers who fail to submit the forms. Is that a good thing or a bad thing?
It is such a basic administrative procedure. Anybody who has been properly trained to conduct an election would know at the conclusion of any process, you must vote and own that document.
But remember that, it came out very clearly that, some of the forms were not signed, and that's actually where, the NASA lawyers made their grounds. So that's one of the things that they used to make their grounds at that time.
But if you look at the election regulations, if you look at the training manual, the presiding officer and the returning officers are required by regulations to sign those forms, stamp them properly, and let the process be concluded in a more organized manner. Under ordinary circumstances, if you write a letter, how can you vote that this is your letter without appending the signature? The failure to sign those forms was not because there is no prevailing laws or regulations. It was simply geared at providing room to manipulate and alter the document. We are not against the law per se.
Okay.
We are against the process leading to the proposals that were presented there in Parliament.
All right. One of the other things, Njogu Baru, I'm coming to you shortly, but one of the other things that he talks about is really stripping off the chair's powers. Wafula Chebukati, if, for example, he's not going to be having so much power with regard to, him being the national returning officer, that, in case that he is not available or something happens, the vice chair can come in and take over that. And that also really says, one of the other things is that, as a chair of the IEBC, you do not need the same credentials as a Supreme Court judge, which was the case when Wafula Chebukati was installed into office. What is your view on that?
First of all, AIBC is an independent constitutional commission protected by the various articles in the Constitution. Any attempts to strip it of its power is unconstitutional, and I'm sure that it's just a waste of time. The High Court will obviously deal with the matter when it goes for their deliberation. Secondly, is the chairman who is the returning officer in respect of presidential elections. Is the one who is gazetted as the returning officer. I can't really reconcile the fact that in his absence, the deputy chair can actually turn out to be a presiding officer because you cannot gazette to presiding officer in respect of each declaration. So again, it's just an exercise in futility. Thirdly, it has been a Commonwealth practice that whoever heads the Electoral Commission is a lawyer or an advocate with the qualification to be appointed to sit in a superior court.
Yes.
It will be against practice for Kenya to devalue that position to say anybody else can actually preside over the elections. Because elections are more or less a legal process, and probably to an extent a political process, and occasionally an administrative process. That's why you find you have the commissioners, and then you have the secretariat.
Okay. Njogu, I'm coming to you shortly, but before then, I just want us to bring in Rashid Ronald. He's joining us from Kisumu by way of phone. Rashid, talk to us about the pictures we have been seeing on our screens. As the demo seems to have started in earnest. What are people saying there?
Yeah, Betty, what you are seeing at the moment are pictures live from Kisumu and, of course, a few meters from Avenue. These are demonstrators who started demonstrating from Kondele. Kondele, of course, is synonymous with such kind of protest. And, of course, earlier on, and a few minutes ago, of course, a confrontation between police and some protesters along Kondele roundabout. And I'm told they've lit some bonfire. I don't know whether, I know you can't see it from very far, you can see a bonfire.
Actually, we can. Yes, we can.
You can see a bonfire, of course.
Yes.
That one has been lit there. And, of course, interesting because there was a confrontation between police and those protesters around that roundabout. It's just a few meters to Kondele roundabout. So these protesters you are seeing, demonstrators you are seeing right now, they were actually on their way to town. And of course, this is just one group. And of course, Kisumu has got very many areas like Nyalenda, Jamasari, and so we expect these several groups to be coming from those areas all the way to town. I'm sure they want to converge in town and of course go all the way to the IEBC offices.
All right, so you've mentioned that there was a confrontation between police officers and the demonstrators. What was that all about?
What happened is that the demonstrators wanted to light some bonfires along the roundabout, and police were trying to ensure that doesn't happen. And of course, without that thing, of course, there is no mandamano here. Mandamano here has to go on with such kind of things. So the police officers were trying to ensure that does not happen, at least for now.
All right. In previous days, Rashid, we've seen businesses, closing for the day, when we have such, such protests. Have you seen that there in Kisumu?
Pardon? Come again?
Yes, I'm talking about the businesses. Normally, people close down businesses just to protect their property when such a protest is ongoing or, is scheduled to happen. Have you seen that today?
Interestingly enough, is that Betty, if you go to the city center, CBD in Kisumu, things are normal, businesses are going on as usual. And even in the estates, you can see as they are passing by, people are going on with their own business. Those who are joining are joining. Those who are going on with their own business are going on with their own business. So far, as now, there is no interruption as far as business activities are concerned in Kisumu here, Betty.
All right, finally, Rashid, before I let you go, I can imagine it's a chaotic situation there. Are we likely to see any leaders, because that area is really considered to be an opposition stronghold? Are we likely to see any leaders coming up and being part of the protests this time around?
So far, we haven't seen any leader, and of course, this is just the beginning. Remember, they just started about 1 hour ago, and I'm sure, probably hoping that once we reach town, we might be able to see leaders. Remember, the other time, Kisumu Governor Professor Anyang' Nyong'o joined them in the demo. So I expect today, of course, they are going to join them later on.
All right, Rashid Ronald there, reporting by way of phone, talking to us about the situation and the pictures you're seeing on your screens. That is in Kondele, and as you've seen, the protesters have already gathered, and the crowd is growing. We'll be getting to understand what is going to be happening in the course of the day. Remember, my colleague has just mentioned that there was a confrontation between police officers and the protesters who wanted to light up tires around some of the roads there, but the police hindered that from happening. So we'll be getting the latest from our Rashid Ronald. And remember that here in Nairobi, we still have our Chris Thairu, who is following up on what's happening in the CBD, and he's going to be updating us on occasion. All right, so for now, though, we want to continue the discussion, and I want to now hear the views of Dr. Njogu joining us from our City Center studio. Now, you've heard what Dr. here in studio has had to say, that really, the problem could actually be the process that Jubilee, members of parliament and legislators have undertaken with this particular amendment bill.
Yeah, okay. Yes, but I don't think that's a problem because first and foremost, I've got a lot of respect for elected members of parliament. And once you're elected as a member of parliament, you get some delegated authority from the people who elected you. And the place for a member of parliament is parliament. So I had my colleague saying that he's not even talking about the merits and the merits of that bill. I think I agree with him because it's not easy to discuss about some document you don't know. So I would like to ask the NASA members of parliament, senators and National Assembly members to go to the respective houses so that they can understand the document and argue from a point of knowledge. I've heard my colleague say that he has no problem with what is called basic administrative processes. But the same basic things he's talking about are the same which which supported Maraga's judgment. So to me, they are very serious issues. On the issue of Chebukati powers being removed, I don't think there are powers removed from Chebukati. And this time, NASA should not have his cake and eat at the same time. The minor KI case reduced the role of the commissioner to 2 basic functions. One of them is actually to receive, to tally, and to establish that the winning candidate has got more than 25% in half of the counties. That is not the type of work that can only be done by somebody with the Supreme Court's qualifications. Anybody can do that. Even me, I can do that. Even you can do that.
But there is what the Constitution says. And
that's what the bill is saying. Okay, you see what is happening is that there is one thing, the Constitution is one thing, but it is actually the rules that operationalize the Constitution. So what we are trying to do is operationalize the Constitution so it can serve the needs of Kenyans. Kenyans are not meant for the law was meant for Kenyans. So what I'm saying is that also to give the vice chairman or the vice chairperson a chance to step in case the chairman is not available, or any other commissioner to step in case the two are not available. It's just the same scenario. We need to have a situation where I've got a backup. You don't have a station whereby when one person is not around,